H-1B Lottery 2027. Avoid these 3 registration traps before March 19. The email came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, not from USCIS, not from an attorney, from a coworker. Panicked, typing fast, asking one question that no one should have to ask 2 days before a registration deadline. Did my employer actually submit my H-1B registration? How do I know for sure? This is a moment thousands of H-1B hopefuls will face in the weeks ahead. A lottery season that USCIS had signaled would bring stricter scrutiny, tighter verification standards, and enforcement mechanisms not seen in the H-1B program in over 5 years. A sudden silence from an employer who said they were handling it. A bright screen showing a MyUSCIS portal with no confirmation visible. An HR contact going quiet at exactly the wrong time, asking questions that sound reassuring, but aren't. This registration window doesn't stretch across months. It closes on March 19th. A deadline that could determine whether you work legally in the United States next fiscal year. A deadline that could affect your visa status, your career trajectory, and your family's plans. A deadline that could separate you from a path to permanent residence you have been building toward for years. One wrong assumption here, one registration trap that you didn't see coming, and you could be locked out of the H-1B lottery entirely before you even realize what happened. What USCIS did in preparation for the fiscal year 2027 H-1B cycle crossed into territory that immigration attorneys had been watching with serious concern for months, and when the new rules came into full view, advocates and legal professionals did not hesitate. They responded with urgent client alerts, emergency legal briefings, and a wave of public information that the general immigrant community desperately needs to hear. Most people panic at this stage of the process. They make the same 3 mistakes. They fall straight into the traps. But today, you're going to do something different. For several months now, there had been signals, not from USCIS press releases, not from the Federal Register, just signals, that the agency was preparing something significantly more rigorous for the FY 2027 H-1B registration cycle. USCIS has been aggressive in its fraud prevention posture, yes, but also methodical in how it builds the infrastructure for enforcement before announcing it publicly. Their changes followed a pattern, a build-up, a consolidation, almost a controlled escalation. But what triggered concern among immigration law firms this season was that the quiet regulatory work suddenly became very quiet indeed. No preview webinars from USCIS, no stakeholder engagement sessions with major employer advocacy groups, no preview FAQ updates to the H-1B program pages on the agency's website. Immigration attorneys who monitor USCIS rule activity recognize the indicators when they see them. The removal of previously scheduled public briefings, the internal processing system updates that show up in agency technical documentation without public explanation, the sudden appearance of new fraud detection language buried inside beneficiary-centric registration guidance, the absence of the usual preseason communication from USCIS to registered attorneys and accredited representatives. And when USCIS goes quiet before a major registration window, something significant is about to land. Earlier this cycle, immigration law professionals and policy monitors detected what they described as a fundamental shift in how USCIS intends to use the MyUSCIS registration portal, including identity verification requirements and employer attestation standards not seen in the H-1B program since the electronic registration system was first introduced. These are moves USCIS only makes when signaling something specific. A heightened commitment to identifying and invalidating duplicate or fraudulent registrations before the lottery is even run. A new emphasis on employer accountability for the accuracy of every data field submitted during the registration window, or a recalibration of how specialty occupation eligibility is being pre-screened at the registration stage rather than at the full petition stage. Observers weren't sure which of those 3 priorities dominated the agency's thinking this cycle, or whether all 3 were being pursued simultaneously. But one thing was unmistakably clear. USCIS was changing its posture toward the H-1B registration process, moving from a largely administrative collection exercise toward an active pre-screening environment. And when that happens without a loud public announcement, the people most at risk are the ones who are still operating under last cycle's assumptions. The guidance issued by USCIS for the FY 2027 registration cycle was not routine. It was not a cosmetic update. It was substantive. And for the hundreds of thousands of foreign nationals and employers planning to participate, it carried immediate and practical consequences that most people have not yet fully processed. Immigration attorney after immigration attorney, in client alert after client briefing, described the changes as technically demanding, operationally unforgiving, and most importantly, structured in a way that penalizes error at the registration stage rather than offering the usual opportunity to cure mistakes during the full petition process. That last point is critical because in prior years, many employers and beneficiaries operated with a quiet assumption that if something went wrong at registration, it could be fixed later when the actual H-1B petition was filed. That assumption has become increasingly dangerous. USCIS has repeatedly signaled, and in some cases confirmed, that errors or anomalies at the registration stage can now result in selection invalidation, meaning your registration could be selected in the lottery and then voided before you ever file a petition. But strategy only works if the people affected remain uninformed. Legal advocates and the immigration attorney community did not let that stand. Their response, a wave of coordinated public education about the three most dangerous traps in this registration cycle, was among the most urgent and widespread seen in recent H-1B seasons. Now let me break down exactly what those three traps are and what you need to do about each one before March 19th. The first trap is the employer verification gap. This is the one that catches the most people, and it catches them because it is invisible until it is too late. Here's how it works. Your employer tells you that they are submitting your H-1B registration. You assume the submission is happening correctly. You assume someone in HR or legal is tracking the confirmation. You assume that if something went wrong, you would be told. None of those assumptions are safe. The MyUSCIS system requires the employer, specifically an authorized signatory with a verified employer account, to complete the registration on your behalf. If that employer account has a verification issue, if the authorized signatory has changed since last cycle, or if the account has any kind of hold or compliance flag attached to it from a previous year's filing, your registration may not go through at all. And here's the dangerous part. You will not receive a notification from USCIS telling you that your registration failed. The silence is not confirmation. The silence is the trap. What you need to do before March 19 is this. Ask your employer directly, not through HR's general inbox, but directly, to confirm that your registration has been submitted and to send you the confirmation number from the MyUSCIS system. That confirmation number is the only proof that matters. If they cannot produce it, ask why. If they are evasive, escalate immediately to a licensed immigration attorney. You have time, but only if you act now. The second trap is the duplicate registration problem, and it has become significantly more dangerous in the FY 2027 cycle than it was in prior years. USCIS rules prohibit an individual from being registered more than once in the same H-1B lottery, either by the same employer multiple times or by multiple employers who are considered related entities under the agency's affiliation rules. In past years, the agency caught some duplicate registrations, but not all of them. This cycle, USCIS has substantially enhanced its fraud detection systems, specifically its ability to identify duplicate registrations through cross-referencing passport numbers, biographical data, and employer tax identification patterns. If your registration is flagged as a duplicate, even if you were not aware that two separate employers submitted your information, your selection can be invalidated. This means that if you are currently in a situation where you have more than one employer interested in sponsoring your H-1B, you and your legal team need to be extremely precise about which employer is submitting the registration and ensure that only one valid registration is submitted on your behalf. It also means that if you switched employers recently and your previous employer has any outstanding registration access connected to your profile, that situation needs to be resolved before the window closes. Do not assume that old employer accounts are automatically inactive. They are not always. And an old, unresolved employer connection is exactly the kind of thing that can create a duplicate flag that voids your selection after the lottery runs. The third trap is the specialty occupation documentation gap, and this is the one that is growing more dangerous with each passing cycle. At the registration stage, USCIS does not require you to submit full supporting documentation for your H-1B petition, but the agency has made increasingly clear through its RFE patterns, requests for evidence, and denial trends that it is evaluating whether the job description entered at registration is consistent with specialty occupation requirements under the Immigration and Nationality Act. What this means in practical terms is that if your employer enters a vague, generic, or internally inconsistent job title and description during the registration process, that inconsistency will follow your case through the entire process. It becomes the foundation for an RFE. it becomes a reason for a denial, and in the worst cases, it becomes evidence used in fraud investigations if the discrepancy is large enough. Before March 19th, your employer, with guidance from a qualified immigration attorney, should ensure that the job description entered in the registration portal accurately reflects a genuine specialty occupation, uses precise language consistent with how USCIS evaluates specialty occupation claims, and aligns with the actual role you will be performing. Generic titles like IT consultant or business analyst, submitted without supporting context, are increasingly being flagged at the petition stage for intensive scrutiny. The registration is the foundation. If the foundation is wrong, everything built on top of it is at risk. Now I want to address something that comes up in every H-1B season, and it is more important than ever this year. There are registration services, consultants, and self-described immigration specialists who will offer to handle your H-1B registration for a fee. Some of them are legitimate, many of them are not. USCIS regulations are clear. The H-1B registration must be filed by the employer, not by the beneficiary. If someone is approaching you as an individual and asking you to pay them directly to register your H-1B, that is almost certainly fraudulent. It is also a direct pathway to a registration that gets invalidated, because the person submitting it may not have a legitimate employer account, may be submitting fraudulent employer information, or may be creating the exact kind of irregular registration that USCIS's new fraud detection systems are specifically designed to catch. If you are paying out of pocket for your H-1B registration directly, stop. That is not how this process works. Talk to a regulated immigration attorney immediately. Let me also address what happens if you are selected in the lottery, because the work does not stop at selection. Selection is not approval. Selection is an invitation to file a full H-1B petition, including all supporting documentation, within a specific filing window. If you are selected, your employer and their legal team will have a defined period to submit the complete petition package. That package must include a certified labor condition application from the Department of Labor, a detailed job description, evidence of your educational qualifications, and documentation supporting the specialty occupation claim. The timeline between selection notification and the petition filing deadline is tight. If your employer is not prepared, if they have not already begun the LCA process, if they have not gathered your supporting documents, if they have not engaged a qualified attorney, the filing window can close before the petition is ready. Do not wait until you are selected to start that preparation. Start now. Ask your employer today what their post-selection plan looks like. Ask who their attorney is. Ask what documents they will need from you. A selected lottery registration that expires because the petition wasn't filed on time is one of the most painful outcomes in this entire process, and it is entirely preventable. I also want to speak directly to those of you who have been through the H-1B lottery before and did not get selected. The statistical reality of this process is difficult. In recent cycles, USCIS has received hundreds of thousands of registrations for a capped number of available visas, 65,000 in the regular cap plus 20,000 for the advanced degree exemption. Selection is not guaranteed and it is not merit-based. It is a lottery. That means qualified, legitimate candidates with strong cases and excellent employers are not selected every single year, not because something was wrong with their case, but because the numbers are what they are. If you were not selected in a prior cycle, that does not disqualify you from registering again. If your employer is eligible and willing to sponsor you, registration in FY 2027 is absolutely worth pursuing, but go in with eyes open. Have a backup plan. Know what your options are if you are not selected again, whether that means extending your current status, exploring alternative visa categories, or considering whether your employer has entities in other countries that could support a different pathway. Hope is not a strategy. Preparation is. As the FY 2027 registration window moves toward its March 19th close, more guidance will emerge from USCIS, from immigration attorneys tracking early registration data, and from employer groups navigating the new verification requirements. But one thing is already clear. Knowing these three traps, the employer verification gap, the duplicate registration problem, and the specialty occupation documentation gap, does not make you paranoid. It makes you prepared. It means you are protecting your case. It means you are protecting your family's future in this country. Share this video with every H-1B hopeful in your network right now. A registration mistake made before March 19th cannot always be undone after March 19th. Subscribe to Visa Status Radar for more protection. We protect you with real information as the next phase of this process unfolds.